Jack had always found the jungles of Vathara to be both breathtaking and terrifying. The alien landscape was a tangled mass of thick vines, massive trees that seemed to touch the sky, and strange creatures that roamed the underbrush. His mission on this planet was simple: explore and gather information. He was an explorer, not a soldier anymore. But the wilderness of Vathara had a way of making him feel like he was back in the heat of battle. Every rustling in the trees, every odd noise from the dark, and every shadow could be the sign of something deadly. Today, however, the jungle felt different. It was quieter than usual. The air hung thick with moisture, and Jack could hear the steady beat of his own heartbeat in the silence. He pushed through the thick foliage, his boots crunching softly on the wet earth. He had been on this planet for a week now, exploring, mapping, and searching for the settlements of the alien species that inhabited the planet. There were rumors of an advanced species called the Jekari, but no one had ever confirmed their existence. Jack had his doubts about the stories, but that didn't stop him from looking. As Jack moved through the dense underbrush, he suddenly heard something strange. It wasn't the usual sounds of the jungle. It was a cry, a distant, panicked scream. The sound was human, or at least it was close. His instincts kicked in and he broke into a run, following the sound without hesitation. He had no idea what it was, but he couldn't ignore a cry for help, no matter where it came from. He pushed past the thick leaves and found himself at the edge of a small clearing. In the center, a woman was trapped in what looked like quicksand. She was struggling, her arms flailing as the dark, muddy earth sucked her down. The sight was jarring. Her skin was a strange shade of pale green, and her hair, if it could be called that, was long and silver, flowing like strands of moonlight. Her eyes, wide with panic, were a deep shade of violet. She looked almost human, but there was something undeniably alien about her features. Without thinking, Jack rushed toward her, moving as fast as he could. The quicksand had already pulled her up to her waist, and it was clear that if she stayed in there any longer, she would be pulled under entirely. Jack cursed under his breath as he slid to his knees, reaching for her hand. She was weaker than he expected, but he pulled with all his strength, not letting go. "Hold on!" he shouted, but the woman didn't respond with words, only more frantic movement. With a final, desperate heave, Jack pulled her free, rolling her onto solid ground. She gasped for air, coughing and choking from the mud. She was covered in it, her clothes torn and dirt-streaked, but she was alive. Jack sat back on his heels, breathing heavily from the exertion. He looked at her closely now, noticing the pointed ears and delicate, almost ethereal features that confirmed she was not human. But there was no time to think about that now. The woman looked at him with a mix of confusion and suspicion, her violet eyes narrowing. She tried to sit up but winced, clearly in pain. Her breathing was heavy and she trembled slightly, either from the cold or shock. Jack couldn't tell. He stood up, offering his hand to her. She hesitated, but after a long moment she took it. "I'm Jack," he said, his voice calm, trying to ease the tension that hung between them. "Are you okay?" She looked at him for a moment longer, then nodded, though it was clear she didn't completely trust him. "Tylara," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I thank you." "You're welcome," Jack replied, glancing around. "What happened? How did you end up in there?" Tylara looked at the ground for a moment, gathering her thoughts before she spoke. I was separated from my group," she said slowly, her accent thick but clear. "I was searching for something, a relic, but the jungle, it is more dangerous than I expected." Jack could see she wasn't telling the whole story, but there was no point in pressing her for answers right now. Instead, he helped her stand, steadying her as she regained her balance. She seemed to be in pain, but she refused to show it. "Are you alone out here?" Jack asked. "I don't see any sign of other people." Tylara nodded but didn't speak immediately. She seemed to be debating whether or not to trust him. Jack knew the feeling. He'd been in plenty of situations before where trust was earned, not given freely. He didn't expect her to open up to him right away. "I can't stay here," Tylara finally said, glancing around nervously. "The jungle is dangerous. I need to move." Jack looked at her, his instincts telling him to offer help, but something about the way she spoke made him hesitate. She was not from around here, that much was clear. Her people, whoever they were, seemed to have a different way of doing things, but she was injured and she didn't have anyone else. He couldn't just leave her out here. "All right," he said after a moment. "I'm not far from my camp. It's safe there. You can rest and get cleaned up." Tylara didn't argue. Instead, she nodded slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing just a little. Jack offered her his arm, and she accepted it without another word. Together, they moved through the jungle, Jack doing his best to keep an eye out for any potential threats. As they walked, he couldn't help but glance at her. The alien woman was fascinating with her strange features and alien presence. But more than that, she was a survivor. They reached Jack's small camp about an hour later. It wasn't much, just a few makeshift tents, a fire pit, and a handful of supplies. Jack had been living out here for the past few weeks, gathering information and exploring, but he never expected to find anyone like Talara. She settled by the fire, still looking uneasy, but her eyes softened a little as she warmed up. Jack busied himself with making some food, trying to offer her something that would make her feel more comfortable. She didn't seem to trust the food, but after a long pause, she ate a small portion. Her gaze didn't leave him the entire time. Jack didn't mind. It was natural to be wary of someone you just met, especially in a place like this. "You're not like the others," Talara said suddenly, her voice low. "Most humans, they do not help, they see us as enemies." Jack glanced at her, surprised. "I'm not most humans," he said simply. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I can see that." They sat in silence for a while, the crackle of the fire the only sound between them. Jack didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know who Talara was or why she had been here. But he did know one thing: she wasn't like the other beings he had encountered on Vathara. There was something different about her, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. And as he sat there, watching her slowly relax in the warmth of the fire, he realized that this strange encounter might be the start of something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. The night passed quietly, and Jack found himself unable to sleep. The air in the jungle was thick with the sound of distant creatures, and though the fire in front of them crackled softly, there was an underlying tension in the air. Jack sat up, his back against a tree, his eyes drifting toward Talara, who was still awake across the fire. She sat with her legs drawn up, her gaze fixed on the flames. He couldn't help but wonder about her story. She was clearly no ordinary person. He had seen many things in his time, but a being like Talara, someone so clearly different yet so human-like, was something he hadn't prepared for. There was something in her demeanor that intrigued him. She wasn't just a survivor of the jungle, she had a quiet strength, something in her eyes that spoke of experience beyond her years. He knew it wasn't his place to ask too many questions, but he also knew that whatever her story was, it wasn't one she would easily share. Jack had learned that much about people from his years of military service. Trust had to be earned, not demanded. When the sun began to rise, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Talara stood up. She moved with a grace that was almost otherworldly, her alien features still striking but now softened by the early light. Jack had already packed most of their supplies, preparing for another day of travel. They had to keep moving. He knew it wasn't safe to stay in one place for too long, especially in a jungle as dangerous as Vathara. As Talara gathered her belongings, Jack couldn't help but ask the question that had been burning in the back of his mind since the night before. "Why were you out here alone?" he asked, his voice gentle but probing. "You said you were separated from your group, but who were they? What's your mission?" Talara didn't answer right away. She seemed to be weighing her words carefully. Finally, she looked up at him, her violet eyes studying him for a long moment. "They are my people," she said slowly. "I belong to a group of explorers, a tribe from my home planet. We were sent to find something. A relic, something that could help our people in the war against another faction. It is a long journey, and we do not trust outsiders. That is why I was alone." Jack nodded, trying to process what she was saying. It made sense. She had mentioned a war before, but he hadn't fully understood what she meant. He had to admit that his curiosity was growing by the minute. "Your people," Jack said, his voice cautious. "What exactly are you fighting for? What's the war about?" Talara hesitated again, her eyes flickering away from him as though she were debating whether to reveal more. Finally, she spoke. "There are two factions of my species," she explained. "One believes in peace, in unity with other species like yours. The other, led by a powerful warlord, believes in dominance. They want to enslave other species, to conquer planets and expand our empire. My group is part of the resistance. We fight to protect our people from that future." Jack was quiet for a moment, absorbing what she had said. He had heard of intergalactic wars before, but hearing it from someone who was directly involved made it all the more real. He looked at Talara, the weight of her words settling on him. "And this relic," Jack said after a pause. "It's supposed to help your people." Tylera nodded. "Yes, it's a weapon, a powerful one hidden on a distant planet, but it's not just any weapon, it's the key to the future of my people. Whoever controls it controls the balance of power." Jack didn't speak for a long time. It wasn't just the gravity of her words that held him in silence. It was the realization that he had just become part of something much bigger than himself. Whatever Tylera was looking for, it wasn't just some treasure. It was the future of her people, and if he helped her, he would be stepping into the middle of a war between alien factions. Tylera seemed to sense his hesitation. She met his gaze, her eyes soft but steady. "I know this is a lot to ask of you," she said quietly. "I did not want to drag you into this conflict, but you saved me, and now I must ask for your help. My people, they will not trust you, but you are the only one who can help me get the relic before the Warlord's faction does. If they find it first, everything we've worked for will be lost." Jack felt a pang of responsibility. He had never been one to shy away from a fight when it was necessary, but he also knew the cost of such decisions. Helping Tylera could mean facing enemies beyond his wildest imagination. It could mean betraying everything he thought he knew about intergalactic peace. But there was something about Tylera that made him believe in her cause. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, the quiet strength she exuded. Or maybe it was the way she had trusted him even when she had no reason to. Either way, he found himself nodding before he even realized it. "I'll help you," Jack said, his voice firm. "But we need to be careful. I don't know what kind of enemies we're dealing with, but I'm not going into this blind. We need a plan." Tylera's face softened, and for the first time, Jack saw a flicker of true gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I will follow your lead. We will find a way to get the relic and protect my people." The decision had been made. Jack knew there was no turning back now. He was in this whether he liked it or not. They would have to move quickly. With that, the two of them began their journey deeper into the jungle, heading toward the location Tylera had been searching for, the ruins that held the key to the relic. The path was treacherous, filled with wild creatures, and the terrain only seemed to get more dangerous the further they went. But Jack was used to adversity. The dense foliage made it hard to see far ahead, and the sounds of strange animals echoed from all sides. He kept his hand on the hilt of his weapon, ready for anything. Tylera, despite her injuries, moved with determination, her alien strength making it easier for her to push through the thick brush. As they traveled, Jack couldn't help but notice how often Tylera glanced at him. It wasn't the way a friend would look at someone, but something more calculating. She was sizing him up, trying to figure him out. Jack didn't mind. He did the same. They reached the base of a large cliff by midday. The ancient ruins that Tylera had mentioned were said to be somewhere at the top. Jack could see the faint outlines of old stone structures that had been overgrown by time and nature, partially hidden behind vines and moss. The place had the feel of a lost civilization, forgotten for centuries, but Jack knew they didn't have time to waste. "All right," he said, turning to Tylera. "We need to climb, stay close, and watch your step. These ruins could be unstable." Tylera nodded, and the two of them began their ascent. As they climbed higher, the air grew thinner, and Jack's muscles started to burn. But he kept pushing forward, determined to reach the top before they were caught by any of the Warlord's forces. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the summit. There, hidden in the overgrowth, was a large stone door. It was ancient, covered in runes that Jack couldn't read, but Tylera seemed to recognize them. Her face lit up with recognition as she stepped forward. "This is it," she whispered. "The relic is inside." Jack stood back, watching her as she began to chant softly in her native language. The stone door slowly began to shift, revealing the dark interior of the ancient temple. It was time. The relic and the fate of Tylera's people was within their reach. But Jack had no idea just how dangerous this mission would become. And as the door creaked open, he knew that their lives would never be the same again. The air inside the ancient temple was cold and damp. The faint light from the opening door barely illuminated the vast, dark space ahead. Jack could feel the weight of the moment settling in. They were about to enter a place that had been hidden for centuries, a place that could hold the key to Tylera's people's survival. It was a mix of excitement and unease, but Jack knew they couldn't turn back now. Tylera moved ahead, her steps silent and graceful, her alien eyes scanning the dark ahead. Jack followed closely behind, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. He wasn't sure what kind of traps or dangers lay in the darkness, but he had a feeling that they weren't alone. The inside of the temple was far more elaborate than Jack had expected. The walls were adorned with intricate carvings and strange symbols that seemed to shift in the dim light. The floor was covered with dust and debris, but the further they went, the more Jack could see that this was no ordinary ruin. The place had been built with precision, as if it were designed to hold something important, something powerful. "Where exactly is it?" Jack asked quietly, his voice echoing in the stillness. Talara didn't respond right away. She was focused on the carvings, her fingers tracing the symbols on the wall. It was as if she was searching for something hidden, something only she could understand. "This way," she finally said, pointing to a narrow passageway at the end of the hall. Jack followed her, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The deeper they ventured into the temple, the colder the air became. It was as though the very walls were closing in on them. They reached the end of the hallway, where an enormous stone door stood, much like the one they had entered through. But this one was different. The carvings on the door were even more elaborate, and in the center was a glowing blue crystal embedded into the stone. It pulsed softly, as if it were alive. Jack could feel the energy in the room change, a palpable shift that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Talara stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the crystal. "This is it," she whispered. "The relic is inside." Jack moved closer, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. "How do we open it?" he asked. Talara didn't respond at first. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small, silver device. She pressed a button, and a holographic map of the temple appeared in front of her. The map flickered for a moment before she found what she was looking for. "Here," she said, her voice steady. "The crystal is the key. I need to unlock it with this device." Jack watched as she approached the door, her fingers moving quickly over the symbols etched into the stone. She placed the device on the crystal, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, the crystal began to glow brighter, casting an eerie blue light across the room. The stone door began to move. Slowly, it opened with a grinding sound that echoed through the temple, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. Jack stepped forward cautiously, but Talara was already moving ahead, her eyes fixed on the chamber. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the floor was covered in old, broken artifacts. But in the center of the room, resting on a pedestal, was a small metal box. It was simple, but it had an aura of power that was undeniable. "This is it," Talara said, her voice filled with awe. "The relic." Jack looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew they were close, but he also knew that this was where things could go wrong. The Warlord's forces could be close, and they wouldn't hesitate to kill for the relic. Talara moved to the pedestal, her fingers trembling as she reached for the box. But before she could touch it, a loud crash echoed through the temple. The sound of heavy footsteps reverberated off the walls, and Jack immediately dropped into a defensive stance, his hand on his weapon. Talara froze, her eyes widening in fear. "It's them," she whispered. "The Warlord's soldiers." Jack didn't waste any time. He grabbed Talara's arm and pulled her toward the nearest exit. They had to move fast. "Stay close," he ordered, his voice low. "We need to get out of here." Talara nodded, her expression grim. They ran through the hallways, the sounds of the soldiers growing louder behind them. Jack's mind raced. They had to reach the door before the soldiers did. If they didn't, they'd be trapped. As they rounded a corner, Jack caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows ahead. He raised his weapon, ready to fire, but then he saw who it was. A group of Jakari warriors emerged from the darkness, their eyes focused on Talara. They wore the markings of the Warlord's faction. "Stop!" one of them shouted, raising a weapon aimed directly at Talara. Jack stepped in front of her, his body tensed. "Move out of the way," he growled. "We're leaving." The warriors didn't budge. Instead, they moved closer, their weapons trained on Jack. Talara's face went pale as she realized what was happening. "They're after the relic," she said quietly, her voice shaking. "They won't stop until they have it." Jack knew that the situation was growing more dangerous by the second. There was no time for negotiation. They needed to fight their way out. Without warning, he fired a shot into the air, the blast echoing through the temple. The warriors flinched, and for a moment there was hesitation in their eyes. It was enough. Talara moved quickly, grabbing the relic from the pedestal and placing it in her bag. "Let's go," she shouted. Jack didn't wait for a second invitation. He grabbed her arm and ran, firing a few more shots to keep the warriors at bay. They dashed down the hallway, the sound of pursuit growing closer. Jack could hear the soldiers shouting, but they couldn't catch up. As they reached the main chamber, Jack saw the stone door ahead of them. The light from the outside filtered through the cracks, offering a glimmer of hope. But there was one last obstacle standing in their way. The door was closing. "Go!" Jack shouted, pushing Tylara forward. "Run!" They made it through just as the door slammed shut behind them. They were outside, the cool air of Vathara hitting their faces as they ran toward the jungle. Jack didn't look back. He knew that if they stopped, the soldiers would catch up. They ran for what felt like hours, neither of them speaking. The only sounds were the rustling of the leaves and the pounding of their feet on the earth. Finally, when they were far enough away from the temple, they stopped to catch their breath. Tylara looked at Jack, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You did it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We did it." Jack smiled, though it was more out of relief than anything else. "We're not done yet," he said. "We still have to get out of here alive." Tylara nodded, but Jack could see the determination in her eyes. They had the relic. They had what they came for, but the war wasn't over. It was only just beginning. As they moved deeper into the jungle, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. The Warlord's forces would keep coming. They would stop at nothing to get the relic, and Jack knew that they would have to be ready for whatever came next. But for now, they had what they needed. And that was enough. The jungle was dense, and the air thick with moisture as Jack and Tylara moved deeper into the wilderness. They had managed to escape the temple, but they both knew this was only the beginning. The Warlord's soldiers would not give up easily. They were relentless, and now that they had the relic, Jack and Tylara were more valuable than ever before. The first few hours of their escape were quiet. The sounds of the jungle surrounded them, and Jack kept his senses sharp, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. Tylara, though still shaken from the chase, moved with a steady determination. Jack couldn't help but admire her. Despite everything, she never once showed signs of weakness. She was a warrior in every sense of the word. They stopped at a small clearing to rest, the dense trees providing them with a little shelter from the heavy rain that had started to fall. Jack pulled out the map he had been carrying and spread it out on the ground between them. Tylara sat beside him, her eyes still scanning the surroundings, her posture alert. "We need to get to the eastern ridge," Tylara said, her finger tracing a path on the map. "There's a hidden outpost there. My people, my allies, will be able to help us." Jack looked at the map, then back at her. "How far is it?" he asked, already knowing the answer would be difficult. "It's a 3-day journey," Tylara replied. Her voice was calm, but Jack could see the concern in her eyes. "If we move quickly, we might make it in 2. But it will be dangerous. The Warlord's soldiers are likely already searching for us." Jack nodded. He had been expecting something like this. The jungle wasn't just a maze of trees and rivers. It was home to creatures both beautiful and deadly. And if the Warlord's soldiers were on their trail, there was no telling how long they would have until the first attack came. "We'll keep moving at first light," Jack said, folding the map and tucking it back into his bag. He looked at Tylara. "We have to stay ahead of them. Keep your head down and stay alert." Tylara gave a small nod, her expression unreadable. But Jack knew she was just as aware of the danger as he was. They had already survived one close call, but they couldn't afford to get complacent. Every step from here on out was crucial. The rain continued to fall, the steady sound of it hitting the leaves above them soothing, but also a reminder of how exposed they were. Jack set up a small fire, just enough to keep them warm, but not enough to attract attention. They sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts, the weight of the situation pressing on them both. As the night deepened, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was a subtle feeling, but it was there. He had learned long ago to trust his instincts, especially when it came to danger. He stood up and silently moved toward the edge of the clearing, peering into the shadows beyond. The rain made it harder to see, but his eyes adjusted quickly. Nothing. He returned to the fire, but the feeling remained. Something wasn't right. "We need to move," Jack said suddenly, his voice low but urgent. He turned to Tylara, who had already risen to her feet, her body tense. "Stay close and keep quiet." Tylara didn't ask questions. She simply nodded and followed him as they slipped into the jungle once more. The sound of the rain, now heavier than before, seemed to cover their footsteps. Jack led the way, his mind racing. If they were being watched, they would need to be more careful than ever. They couldn't risk making any noise or drawing attention. They moved silently through the dense foliage, Jack's hand on his weapon, Talara close behind him. The jungle was alive with sound, rain falling on leaves, distant animal calls, and the rustling of unseen creatures. But Jack remained focused, his senses heightened, his ears straining for any unusual noise. An hour passed and still Jack felt the unease in his gut. They stopped briefly to check their bearings. Jack pulled out the map again, but as he was studying it, Talara's voice broke the silence. "We're not alone," she whispered. Jack immediately tensed. He hadn't heard anything, but Talara's expression was all the confirmation he needed. He quickly scanned the area again, his eyes darting from one shadow to the next. "Stay behind me," Jack ordered. "Keep low." Talara moved quickly to follow his command, crouching down beside him. Jack crouched too, his movements slow and deliberate as he crept forward, trying to locate the source of the disturbance. There, movement in the trees. Jack's eyes locked on the figure. It was a soldier, dressed in the same uniform as the ones they had escaped from earlier. He was alone, but Jack knew better than to assume that meant he was unprepared. The soldier didn't notice them. His focus was elsewhere, scanning the area as if looking for something, or someone. Jack's hand tightened around his weapon, ready to act at a moment's notice. "We need to take him out quietly," Jack murmured to Talara. She nodded, her face grim. They moved like shadows, silent and swift. Jack crept closer, using the dense vegetation to mask his approach. Talara followed, her eyes never leaving the soldier. When they were close enough, Jack signaled for her to stay behind, then moved in for the takedown. With one swift motion, he tackled the soldier to the ground, his hand over the man's mouth to stifle any noise. The soldier struggled, but Jack was faster, knocking him unconscious with a quick strike to the side of his head. Breathing heavily, Jack stood over the soldier, checking to make sure he was out cold. He quickly rifled through the soldier's gear, finding a communication device and a few other supplies. "Let's move," Jack said, tossing the equipment into his bag. "We don't have time to waste." They continued on, moving faster now, with the soldiers' discovery weighing heavily on their minds. The jungle seemed darker now, the sounds of the rain and wildlife growing more distant. Jack couldn't help but wonder how much longer they could keep ahead of the Warlord's forces. By the time they reached the eastern ridge, the sun had begun to set. They were exhausted, their bodies aching from the long hours of travel. But the sight of the ridge gave them a sense of hope. They were close to the outpost, closer to safety. "We made it," Talara said, her voice filled with relief. Jack nodded, but he wasn't ready to relax just yet. "We're not there yet. Stay alert." They moved cautiously up the ridge, keeping their heads down. The outpost was hidden from view, tucked behind a cluster of large rocks and dense vegetation. As they approached, Jack felt a flicker of relief. They were finally getting close to help, but just as they reached the edge of the outpost, a voice called out, "Stop right there." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He turned to see a group of Jakari warriors standing in front of them, their weapons aimed at him and Talara. "I told you to stay alert," Jack muttered under his breath. Talara stepped forward, her eyes locking with the leader of the group. "I know them," she said, her voice steady. "They're with us." The warriors lowered their weapons, but the leader still looked suspicious. "You've brought a human," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "Why?" Talara didn't hesitate. "He helped me get the relic," she said, her voice firm. "He's with us now." The leader studied Jack for a moment before nodding. "Very well, you're safe here for now." Jack let out a quiet sigh of relief. They had made it, but the war was far from over. They still had the relic, but they would need to stay vigilant. The Warlord's forces would come for it, and they had no intention of giving up without a fight. As they entered the outpost, Jack glanced over at Talara. She had been through so much, and now, finally, they were in a place where they could rest and regroup. But the path ahead was still uncertain. Jack knew that the battle for the relic had only just begun, and the stakes had never been higher.